HiSec Buyback offers 90% JITA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
This is Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online. I'm your host, Artimus Albosa. Joining me today, we have Kenneth Feld.
How's it going, Artimus?
Going very well. Happy to have you here. Of course, an esteemed member of CSM 16, also a heavyweight industrialist is the way that I like to describe you, whether you like that or not. Also joining us, we have Dayton, who's going to be just manning the engineering station from the background. So thank you very much for that help today. And yes, Space Gator, you are right. Happy patch day, everyone. It is a huge patch on today, Tuesday, December 7th. If you've logged into the launcher, you've already seen the links to the patch notes, probably had to download some new stuff, so be prepared for that. We're going to be going through the patch day, doing a quick breakdown. We had a preview show yesterday where we went through some of those details, but it's live to TQ now. We've got our hands on it, and we're going to talk through it. Real quick off the top, I just do want to mention whenever a new patch happens and that patch impacts the way that ships work, many of you run straight to figuring out, okay, what do I need to change on my ships? And a tool for doing that is called PIFA. It is used by many members of the community, and it has been updated for the patch already, which is wonderful. So if you are like me, and you like to go in and see, okay, how do I change my fits? What ship is best to use, etc., etc. Definitely take a look at PIFA, get that thing updated so that you can, I mean, I don't mind if you want to play with some fits while you have the show on in the background, go for it. It's totally fine. I'll throw a link in the stream for you guys. Also, while we're doing some of the discussions, I do want to mention there have been some known issues identified with the patch. So if you're in game, and you're messing around with some things and you're looking at your tooltips or your attributes tabs, just bear in mind some of those do have some typos or some things that aren't calculating properly. So your single source of truth is going to be the patch notes, and I believe PIFA is working off of the game data that is from the patch notes. That should also give you accurate information, but you never know. So just before you get too worried, definitely check the patch notes first to see what it's supposed to look like. And that's the way it should be performing in game. It just may not show it in the tooltips.
Yeah, it's the attributes are correct. The dogma is correct. It's just the tool. Some of the tooltips are showing incorrect data.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. This patch, we have been talking about it. It has been highly anticipated and highly controversial, I think is a good way to describe it. It is part of the outcome from the From Extraction to Production dev blog that dropped a little while ago. There's been a lot of community back and forth with CCP and the CSM over what would be good for the game and its various component player bases. And this is the result. This is what we got, and this is what we're going to roll through. Right off the bat, if we're thinking about the players who are going to have their gameplay changed, off the top of my mind are Rorqual and Orca pilots. Kenneth, anybody else you think should definitely absolutely take a look at these patch notes because their gameplay is changing?
Anyone who reprocesses and had everything to level 5, they're going to open up their skill queue or their skill catalog and go, oh no, where'd all my stuff go? So those, there are a few other people, the Rorqual pilots, most of them knew a nerf was coming. I don't think this was any shocker to them. They may not like it, but that was pretty much a 33% just chop them at the knees, send them on their way. Very little else changed with that ship other than the boost got a little bit stronger. The Orca had the biggest change. The Orca had all of its mining bonuses removed from the hull, but they were put into the Indy core. And it kind of waffled some. Originally, it was all being replaced by the Indy core, and then the Indy core got cut back a little bit. So overall, they ended up with a nerf about 25%, I think, roughly, because they did some drone speed stuff in there to kind of help things. So it's a paper yield versus a realistic yield type of thing. But they did get nerfed. But they got the Indy core, so their boost got a big buff. So you can take that however you want, depending on if you were already running an Orca with a couple barges, you're probably pretty happy about that change. If you were one of those guys who would park your Orca next to a rock and put out your drones and come back 3 hours later when your mining hold was full, you're probably not quite as excited. And those are the two big play styles there. However, if you were one of those pilots who was piloting a Hulk, a Mackinac, a Covetor, or a Retriever, you're probably high-fiving your dog and running around the house like a crazy person because your stuff is jacked. I mean, you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the old movie Commando back when he was ripped, right? The Procure and the Skiff, you're probably not quite as happy. Be honest with you, I'm not real happy either. They kind of, for lack of a better words, got the short end of the stick. They had high hopes in the beginning, and just the way things worked out to make the progression work and stuff, they kind of ended up at the tail end of the table, and there wasn't a whole lot of scraps left when it came to them. So sorry about that, but there you go.
Let's dive into that and just use this as a good starting point then. So Procure and Skiff pre-patch, they were very tanky. They were the option for if you wanted to avoid getting ganked in HiSec, or if you just wanted to be more able to last on field if you got dropped out at nullsec or lowsec or wherever you were mining. And they were sort of like a mid-level yield, if memory serves. So the Covetor did better.
Lowest yield.
Yeah.
Lowest yield.
Covetor did better. The Retriever did better. The Retriever had a higher ore hold as well, so you could stay out on field longer than the Procure. It was very much just like okay, I want to be defensible. I don't want to die sort of ship. So what are the changes that make it less viable for that particular play style?
Okay, so we'll look at this together because the ships kind of go together. The Skiff and the Procure kind of go together. The Retriever and the Mackinac and the Covetor and the Hulk. We'll talk about the Procure and the Skiff right now. So they both lost mid slots. The Skiff lost 1, the Procure lost 2. They changed some of the base stats, some of the agility, doubled the mass, increased the resists on them. So there's a lot of changes under the hood there that are in the attributes. And PIFA, as far as I know, what I've seen out of PIFA so far, it's been updated and it works really well. So they didn't get a big buff to EHP. And depending on how you fit it, like some people, the Procure only has 2 mid slots now. So if you want to put a survey scanner in one to scan the rock, then you're probably going to end up a little bit less EHP than you were before. The other thing that kind of hurt them is they were all ready to get a buff in yield. They had a 10% duration buff, which is an 11% yield increase. That got removed and replaced with a 3% per level straight yield buff. So you lost an 11% effective yield buff in the duration, and you got a 15% buff added in. So you were +4. Well, then due to some other things, the Tech 1 strips lost roughly 10% of their yield. So now you were +4, you put Tech 1 strips on there, you're -10, now you're -6% yield. And there's not a whole lot we can, it's just the way that it worked out. I wish it was different. I wish they didn't have to nerf the T1 strips. I know why he did it. I can't talk about that. And I agree that something had to give. Um, I just wish it wasn't that, but something had to give, and that's what gives. So the coveter, I'm sorry, the procurer ended up a little bit worse for the wear. The skiff though came out of it EHP wise, smelling more like roses than the procurer did, um, and it took a slight hit on Tech 1 yield as well. Now, when you compare that with the new Orca buffs before and after, I think it kind of gets out of that funk once you get a good Orca buff or a Rorqual buff on it, because the buffs got buffed so much, or the boost got buffed so much, that it brings you back out of the negative a little bit, or mostly. So it's kind of a fine line there. Once you get past that point, though, everything else is pretty much a buff across the board.
Right on. It occurs to me, before we start delving too deep into the different barges, we should really talk about the mechanics changes to the crystals and then also to the residue feature. Because when we evaluate barges and procurers and Rorquals and even refining before and after the patch, all of that is impacted by these new changes from the crystals and from the residue mechanic. So let's jump into that real quick, just so we have that foundation of information to build off of when we look at the ship changes. And I want to look at residue first, because we also have to talk about that when we look at crystals. So what is this new residue mechanic?
Okay, so residue is what they were calling waste in the original dev blog. It's basically, I explained this the other night, and for anyone who's a woodworker, you always have to, when you're cutting lumber, you always have to manage what's called a kerf, and that's the thickness of the blade. So if you have like a piece of 6x6 lumber and you need to cut it, you can use a chainsaw, which may have up to like a 3/8 of an inch kerf. And the kerf is what makes all the sawdust that's on the ground. But chainsaw will go right through that 6x6 in a couple of seconds, but you make a lot of sawdust and you lose wood. If you use the skill saw or a reciprocating saw, you can get through it. It would take longer, but the blade's much thinner. It's a lot more precise cut and it's more efficient. It just takes a little bit longer. The same type of analogy can be applied to these crystals. The A crystal is the most efficient, and it cuts through the rock with the least amount of residue being formed. It's a nice cleaner cut, and the rock that comes to you, the amount of residue that's left is the least amount. Then you have the B-type crystals, which go 20% faster. So they're just hacking through that asteroid and leaving a lot of residue out there. And the chunk that you get is the same size, but you get it 20% quicker. It's a 20% duration bonus. So that's actually a 25% increase in yield that you get, but you're just hacking the crap out of that rock. And there's a lot of residue and space dust out there left over from that action.
I do really quick. I want to talk about the graphics for the space dust, because it literally, like, they put in the graphics for the space dust from the residue, and I love it. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
And then the type C is basically, you're something from Friday the 13th and you got chainsaws for hands or something, and it's just whacking the crap out of that asteroid. But you're doing it in a manner where you get very little yield in your cargo. Your yield for a Tech 2 crystal, your yield is cut down to 20%. For the Tech 1 C crystal, it's 25%. But then the wastage, or the residue multiplier is 18 for Tech 1, 28 for Tech 2. So it gives you an effective rate for Tech 1 of 4.5, for Tech 2 of 5.6. That's the effective rate of removal of the asteroid. So you will remove the asteroid much, much quicker with those crystals, but you get less in your cargo hold. And this could be done for a number of reasons. So say that you're on the outskirts of enemy space, or you find someone's R64 moon in low sec, you can run in there real quick, try and hack as much of it as you can. You don't really care what you get. You just don't want the other guy to get it, right? That's as petty as it gets right there. If I can't have it, he can't have it. And you'll destroy their moon at either a 4.5 times pace or a 5.6 times pace. The other way that can be done is, say you have an anomaly and all you have left is dark ochre. Oh God, no one wants dark ochre, right? So you throw in a sea crystal and just start hacking that stuff up, get rid of the anomaly, so you start the timer to get the new one to spawn, right? So just get rid of whatever garbage you don't want, just hack it up and let the timer respawn you a fresh one.
Those are some actually great use cases. I hadn't thought about the anomaly respawning one. That is a really good one, because I remember back when I did do Rorqual mines, it was always, you had the dark ochre rule. You've got to clear it out before you can hop on your spod rocks. But that's good stuff. All right. So with these new crystals, there are the people in chat who are asking, why would anyone ever use Type C? I think we covered that pretty well. There's also been the debate of Type A versus Type B, and why would anyone ever use Type B? And I think the players who are asking that are specifically ones who their exposure to mining is mining R64s. Can you walk us through just like the mindset of someone? What's the difference between mining an R64 versus a belt in HiSec or an anomaly in nullsec, as an example?
The easiest way to look at it is a finite resource or an infinite resource. If you have an infinite resource, then the residue isn't as big of a problem, because the next anomaly will respawn in a few hours. The next ice anomaly will respawn. R4, R4 is pretty plentiful. I wouldn't care someone mined an R4, with a B crystal, because there's tons of R4, right? Now R64, that's one, it's expensive, and two, it's very finite. There's only so many of those moons in the game. And some of them even only have a couple percent on there, so they're really not even that worth that much to mine. So in that case, even the Type A's may be a little too aggressive on their residue. In that case, you may want to use Tech 1 strips or ore strips. But that's a choice you have to make, because the A types will mine quicker, B types will mine even quicker, but obviously that's less overall that you can put in your cargo hold, although your actual yield will be the same. It's just the length of time that you can sit there before the rock goes poof. So it's difficult concept to explain. The way we talked about it before was, once things double, if you use the B-type crystals, you'd get 20 to 25%, or I think it's right at 20% more overall. But now that they're here, you can look at it as, if you are sitting at the 60% wastage, and B-type crystals and Rorquals fall in the same boat because they're only a few percent apart. And the wastage isn't the amount that gets wasted that people are talking about, this residue probability. It's the probability at the end of the cycle, you have a residue event. And if you have that residue event, then you use your residue multiplier to determine how much gets turned into residue. So at a 66% or 60% residue probability, if you work out the math over enough time, it's about a 40% loss in the amount of ore that's available to you to mine, if that makes sense. So if and that's after everything's all done. When we are looking at doubling it, you take the 40, you double it to 80, and you got 20% more than what you did before, but that was pre-patch. Now the patch is here. Whatever you have, if you mine it with a 60% probability, you can just look at whatever that rock is and assume 40% of it is going to be turned into residue, and the rest you'll get into your cargo hold, however long it takes you to mine that.
Yeah, and I realize we totally buried the lead here. Resources were doubled out in space, so the amount of ore in space was doubled, and that's the size of the rocks, right? Not the number of rocks.
Yes, yeah, the rocks themselves doubled, and that counts for everything. That's gas, ice. Moons were also doubled. So yesterday, a moon pulled 20,000 cubic meters per hour. Today, after noon 18, I think it was, moons pull 40,000 cubic meters per hour. So if your moon popped after downtime today, you got the benefit of a double pull for the entire pull. So any pulls that pop after downtime today will be doubled when they pop.
Just as a personal anecdote, I think I'm gonna have to turn back on my R4 moon and my wormholes. For the longest time, I stopped mining it because I couldn't harvest it fast enough, so I always lost some, and it just wasn't worth it. I couldn't harvest enough. But now with Type B crystals, I'm harvesting more, and it doesn't matter that I'm having residue and so I'm losing some, because the amount of ore that's there has been doubled, and I was already losing some anyway. Is there, like, the way the math shakes out, if you're using Type B, are you still getting more ore into your hold out of a single moon chunk than you would have pre-patch, like because stuff was doubled? Does the math work out after the residue?
Yes, no, sort of.
Uh-oh,
Okay,
okay.
so depending on what you're mining with, your yield changed, right? So if you look at it just from a pure yield standpoint, you're going to get more in your hold, except for the few ships that we talked about. But the difference is pre-patch. We'll do it the easy way. Pre-patch, if you had 10,000 of your R4, post-patch you now have 20,000. If what we talked about with your 40%, if you use a B crystals and you have 40% of that 20,000 goes poof on you, that is 8,000 you will not be able to harvest. 8,000 will turn into residue, which means 12,000 is available to go in your cargo hold. Okay. Now, pre-patch, you got the whole 10,000. Post-patch, you got 12,000. But your yield went up, and if you use the B crystals, you get a 20% duration bonus, which is a 25% yield bonus, which means that 12,000 that you mined after the patch takes you less time than the 10,000 did before the patch, even if you ignore the yield increase with the patch and just take into account the crystals.
Wow. So overall, you're getting more ore and you're getting it faster.
Correct.
Awesome. That is some
Now,
great news for a lot of the player base.
if you use the A-type crystals, they work out to 36.7, something like that. Hold on. I got my calculator here to make sure I do this right because I didn't have this number prepared.
Right on. So while you're doing that, I do want to go over just some of the interesting tidbits relating to like the doubling of ore and potential impacts that could have. There's been a lot of discussion in the chat about like this is going to make stuff cheaper, this is going to make stuff more expensive. We're going to be diving into that with some more of the TIS crew, some of our market focused people on tomorrow's show. So Wednesday, December 8th, 0100 Eve time, twitch.tv/talking stations, we'll be delving into what impact could these changes have on markets for all sorts of different things. So if you're interested in that, make sure to tune in tomorrow.
Okay, so if we go back to the type A crystals, we'll start with that same 10,000 rock that you had before. Post-patch, it's now 20,000, but you have about 27% wastage total. So if you take that 20,000 and you waste 27%, it's about 550,000. So now you'll have 14,500 available to mine. I'm sorry, I said 55,000, I meant 5,500. So you would have 14,500 available to mine. So you would get 45% more ore from that rock into your hold. Now, it may take you a little bit longer to mine that, even with the yield increase, because the yield increase on like a Hulk is about 35%. So that won't quite make up for it. You will get the ore quicker, but to mine out that rock will take you a little bit longer, but you get 45% more ore total.
That's awesome. I think we should probably just quickly touch on the mining drones as well and how they were impacted by Residue. Do you know off the top of your head as I pull it up, what's the impact on mining drones?
You would, I think drones, the Tech 1 drones are 0 residue. Tech 2 is 30-ish%, and the faction and excavators are 60. Don't quote me on that. I didn't. I think that's pretty
very
close.
Yeah, the augmented mining drones, so the ones you were using in your Orcas, they have the 40% residue just, and the excavators have 60%. But yeah, so T1, 0. Once again, there was a big concern when this patch first dropped. New bros weren't going to be allowed on moons because they're destroying ore that could be used for industry later. That has just been completely negated. New bros with Tech 1 gear aren't going to be wasting stuff. You have to be into T2 before you start looking into residue. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kenneth.
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Awesome. Then once you step up into T2, now you start making meaningful choices on how much residue am I willing to take versus how much faster I'm mining this ore. How much greater is my ISK per hour? And then that choice becomes even more of a trade-off when you get into the higher yield excavators and augmented.
But something you brought up, and I heard as this patch, as it became public, and I heard more and more, I'm starting to hear stories that resemble you that that I personally didn't even think about while we were designing this, is that there's people out there with moons that don't have the resources in 48 hours, and they're not worth rigging to get the 72 hours, that you physically can't get all of the stuff off of the moons. I know one person basically just opens his moon up and says, hey guys, come, hey, everybody come get your fill because I can't get it all. So, but he gets enough to pay for the fuel and still make some profit, so he still does it. But he's just going to flat use B crystals and take the 25% yield, and he probably still won't be able to get it all, but he'll get what he can quicker. So over the 48 hours that the ore is available, he'll receive more in his cargo. He'll make more ISK, even if he still doesn't mine it out all the way. So that's a lot of what you're saying now that the ore is doubled. So you don't really care about waste because you're just like, give me all I can get for 48 hours. And, you wait a couple more weeks to get another, basically, I just have this look in my mind, and, there's little things where they put you in with the wind machine and the dollar bills floating around, and you have to stuff as much in your pockets as you can in 2 minutes or something. That's what I'm seeing in my mind right now. But it absolutely fits what you guys are talking about, in that you just want as much as you can get as quick as you can get it, and the waste doesn't matter because you can't use it all anyway.
Yeah, that is 100% my situation, and I am ecstatic for it. But I think we've got a good baseline in terms of the underlying mechanics which have changed with the residue, with the new crystals, with the new drones, how that works. Let's now move into the ship changes with that base level of knowledge in place and discuss how they'll work. We already talked about the Procurer and Skiff a little bit. They did take a bit of a hit to their tank. They did, I think you mentioned specifically the Procurer took a bit of a hit to its yield, which is unfortunate. Let's talk about next the Mackinac and the Retriever. Now, when I first started, I started in the mining career progression, and everybody's like, the Retriever, as a new bro, that's where you want to land. It lets you just go out, sit and mine for a bit, chill with your bros on comm, watch some YouTube videos, read some tutorials. That's what you want to do. Is that still the same situation? Are the Mackinac and the Retriever still what you want to do if you just want to mine for as long as possible and just chill?
Yeah, absolutely. Those ships got a significant buff to EHP. So if you're in HiSec, you can still get ganked. I mean, they gank jump freighters all the time, right? Uh, 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 a retriever doesn't stand a chance. It's just math. But at what point does the math and getting enough buddies together to go chase down a retriever or a Mackinac stop making sense, right? You almost kind of need of a goal now. So that aside, they got a nice buff to EHP, but they are still the big ore hold or big mining hold, as it's called now. And you can put your lasers on something, talk to you, and I don't mind to mine. I build stuff, right? A lot of people lump that into industry. I look at it as resource gathering and manufacturing. I'm a manufacturer. I resource gather for a social function, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about. Get a bunch of people together, someone runs the boost, everyone's yapping on Discord or whatever your mumble or whatever you have. Everyone's having a good time picking on each other and, you know, uh, rude jokes and everything else. And if you miss a cycle or two, you don't really care because the mining hold's big and you eventually jet can it and, you know, someone might tractor it in or the Orca comes by and you dump it off into the Orca's fleet hangar or whatever. Everybody's having a good time, you know, and then you're like, you know, I would really like that extra 15, 20% yield. Maybe I'll try a Hulk this time. And have you ever seen those games at the mall where it's a little whack-a-mole with like the six little moles that pops up and you have the little hammer with the rope tied to it, so it's about 6 inches shorter than what you need to get the job done, and you're just trying to hit them to get your little tickets or whatever? Yeah, that's what the Hulk is like. But the Hulk is king, and it's high end gameplay, right? It's a lot of clicking, a lot of dragging, jet canning, or having Orca basically parked next to you constantly type thing. It requires some diligence to look after, and that's the big difference between those two lines. Mackinac is chill, you lose some yield, but you can look away for a couple minutes and look back, and your lasers will still be running. If you do that with a Hulk and you look back, both those lasers going to be off, your mining hold's going to be full, and you are doing nothing but taking up space dust somewhere.
Yeah, the last time I did the math pre-patch, like a Hulk after 2 laser cycles, even if you had the max volume in your mining hold, you could only do 2 cycles on your mining lasers before it filled up. So you've got to
It's
be
the same way now.
real quick.
Yeah,
Same way
it's
now?
it's the same way now. However, we traded across the board some duration buffs for some yield buffs. So your duration is going to be a little bit longer, like 10 seconds longer. It's not much, but your yield went up significantly. But it's still, you get 2 cycles and you're pretty much full. If you have, excuse me, if you have Tech 2 B types, a 5% implant, after 2 cycles, I think you have less than 200 cubic meters left. It's not very much. You are pretty much packing that stuff in there. You better start jet canning something,
And I
or
mean,
shipping it off to an Orca.
the reduced duration or the increased duration for a Hulk or a Covetor, like that's a quality of life benefit. You have fewer clicks per hour, but you're getting more ore. Like that's awesome.
Right. Yeah. I tried to explain that to some people and they absolutely just shredded me. And they were just like, they did not get it whatsoever. Um, but, you know, we traded the same 10% duration, which is 11% yield, for 6% per level. So a 30% buff to yield. So I'll give up 11% duration to get a 30% yield buff. I mean, that's like a no brainer right there. Um, I wish there was more areas where we could do that, but there's a fine balance there, you know, especially with the residue and how it's calculated. You know, I think it's at a good happy medium right now. Maybe if there's a little bit of time during the compression, we might be able to fine tune some things. But I think when we start on compression, that's going to be the main focus, and we'll work on, if there's any low hanging fruit left from this, probably snip that. But duration and yield is probably not nearly low enough to go after that.
Right on. And of course, all the barges just got a general refresh in terms of their balance. So you mentioned before the mass has been adjusted for some of them, the volume that they have when they're like assembled. So this is if you're transporting them in a capital ship or a ship maintenance array. Their velocity, basically all of their core stats that you don't really think about when you're calculating which is the best, but that impact your quality of life. How tanky are they? How many slots do you have? How far can you lock? All that stuff has been adjusted, as well as some fitting room adjustments, which I'm exceedingly happy about. Those adjustments have been made. So overall, no matter what, if you are flying a mining barge, you're going to have to go through and redo your fits because they can get better now. Just full stop, they will get better. Let's take a look now and talk about the Orca and the Rorqual. You mentioned both of them. They got a little bit of adjustments. Both of them, I think their overall yield is being decreased. So the solo miner Rorqual or the solo miner Orca, you might consider swapping to a barge. Is that an accurate statement now?
Yes and no. A Rorqual's easy. At 33%, straight across the board, no ifs, ands, or buts, and it pretty much nothing really else changed on the Rorqual. A lot of the other changes for the Rorqual were all in compression, which, as we all know, got pushed off. So it got about a 10% increase in boost, a buff to the boost from 36 to 40% on the T2 Indy core. But short of that, that ship was largely unchanged. Now, I don't want to dismiss that because 33% yield is quite a change, but for still pretty much AFK gameplay, launch drones, press F, come back in 36 minutes. Oh, my ore hold's full, and go on with life. I think it got off kind of easy, but the Orca had the biggest changes because it got an Indy core added. And it's called, just so everyone knows, the Indy core that was in the game was renamed the Capital Indy core. And the Indy core that was added for the Orca is called a large Indy core or industrial core. So that's the new core that was added to the game. And it will make the boost from an Orca quite a bit better than they were before. I don't know. I think CCP Psych maybe, what do you call it, lurking in chat. I don't know if he wants to talk about an Orca or not, but I'll give him a chance right now. If he doesn't, then, the Orca did take a small hit in drones. I'm kind of two minds. I don't mind it because that's AFK gameplay, but it's not a whole lot anyway. So I wouldn't mind if it got restored either, but that's not up to me to necessarily decide that. But if you had two Orcas before, changing one out for a Hulk is probably a much better move because the Hulks are monsters now. Now, if you wanted more AFK-ish, change it out for a retriever or a Mackinac, and you lose a little bit or you gain a little EHP, and you gain a little flexibility with the mining hold size, but you will outmine your Orca by far. And as far as a Rorqual goes, where a Rorqual was yesterday, that's where a Hulk is today for mining. And not on paper. On paper, the Rorqual was out in the middle of nowhere, but the actual yield, which was about 80% of the paper, that's where a Hulk is today. And a Hulk yield is the yield because they've got a 51-kilometer range on the lasers, 58 or 59, I think, if you use ore lasers. So that's a pretty big sphere of influence that you have to hoover everything up. Whereas with the Rorqual, you had to get up and get cozy because the travel time on your excavators was excruciatingly slow. So you wanted to be right up next to the rock when you were mining it.
Wow, that's awesome news. Also, awesome news for you Orca pilots up there. CCP Psych in the chat, live news. We are going to adjust the bonuses so that the Orca with the T2 core should be equal or slightly better than before. So there's some live news for you. Thank you.
There you go. You
CCP
heard it
Psych
from the
and
man. I
yeah.
can't say that. I know that he had while we're doing this, he's texted or chatting with me on Slack. So I didn't know if he wanted to announce it, but I certainly can't because I'm covered by NDA. But if the man says it, I'm sure. I don't know when, but I'm sure that it will happen fairly soon.
Yeah, somebody clip that and stick it on Reddit and make a bunch of miners happy. That'll be awesome news. All right, and with the industrial cores, some things to mention if you're an Orca pilot and you're new to using industrial cores, they do require fuel to run. So you are going to have to deal with that. Are they using the same fuel as the
heavy water? Yep, heavy water. And that's one of the known issues. And honestly, I haven't looked it up. But I'll give you the kind of the rundown of the cores, and then you can kind of figure it out. So the original core, there was only one skill book, and that's been renamed the Capital Industrial Reconfiguration Skill Book. And that's a 50 reduction in heavy water per level of the skill. So up to a 250 reduction. The large industrial or the industrial reconfiguration book that's in the game for the large is a 20 reduction per level. And I've heard, I don't know if people got them confused or what, and I have not looked myself, but I've heard that the large may say 50. I don't know if it says 50 or 20, but it is 20, but it is also broken that it gives you a 20 reduction for level 1, but level 2 through 5 do not work yet as intended as far as reducing the amount that you use. So that is a known issue. I have no idea when it's going to be fixed, but it's known there should be someone working on it, and I don't expect it will take too terribly long.
Yeah, that's great to know and hear. We did have some people we were talking to earlier about a concern about the cost of the fuel eating into sort of the profitability of flying an Orca. Now, with the Orca, we already heard from CCP Psych, it is getting another tweak. So that's just something to bear in mind when we're looking at the yield from an Orca, how much ISK per hour you're going to get. There is the cost to the heavy water. But, I mean, Rorqual pilots have been eating that cost just fine. Is it realistically going to be a significant factor when you're looking at is it worth flying an Orca versus another ship, that heavy water fuel cost?
Heavy water is very skewed in that it's large, it's horrible to move, and I think I have like 340 million units in my hangar because it's leftover waste for nullsec stuff, but it's not worth it in jump fuel to jump at the HiSec to even bother trying to sell it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If I could get it to HiSec easy, I'd go around like Santa Claus and throw it out to everybody I can see just to get rid of it. Maybe I'll asset safety some and just pass it out on contracts or something. I don't know. But it's not very costly. If you have the skill to 5 for the Tech 2 core, you get the reductions. It's not that bad. And now that if Tech 2, if drone mining goes back to where it was before, plus maybe a little bit, if that little bit is enough to pay for the fuel, then you're right back to status quo where you were. Fuel is covered by the little bit of extra, and you go on with life. But if you're mining moons, there's twice as much moons available. So it may take you a little bit longer to mine them, but there's twice as much available. So you should make more ISK in the long run.
Yeah, that's awesome. We did have a question in the chat about the Porpoise. When these dev blog first released, it included a bunch of stuff that through community feedback and discussion with the CSM, they have been pushed or reworked or removed. Seems like the Porpoise changes are one of those. Is that accurate? Am I missing something?
Correct. The Porpoise was not touched during this. I don't know if CCP Psych wants to say, but I believe CCP Swift has said that the porpoise will be looked at when we do compression. And that's my intention too. When we start talking about compression, I will certainly bring up the porpoise. In my mind, the porpoise was always a porpoise and 3 or 4 mining frigates. Guys jump into a wormhole for day trip, huff gas, porpoise compresses it, and out of the wormhole that they go. And even if you use a venture or an endurance as a hauler to haul out the gas that the porpoise compressed as you go, or you just go until everything's full and then leave, that still could be quite a haul for you for the day, depending on what type of gas resource you get in that wormhole. And I'm really interested in exploring those possibilities. I don't know if CCP Cycle let me, but in my mind, that's kind of how I see the ship. And I'd like to advocate along those lines. And there you go.
Well, let's take that opportunity to jump into the gas harvesting side of things. So with these changes, pre-changes, the only way to harvest gas was with a venture or, well, no, you could harvest it with just about anything with turret slots. The best way typically was with a venture or a prospect. Go ahead. You had something.
Actually, believe it or not, the Gnosis self-boosting was one of the best platforms for gas huffing as well.
Yeah, and that's still a thing. But now you have gas harvesting modules to use on your mining barges. So no gas harvesting drones, to my knowledge, but your mining barges, procurer, retriever, etc., those have modules to harvest gas with. I haven't looked at
Not
them yet.
exactly.
Not exactly. What am I doing wrong?
Well, one of the known issues is those blueprints forgot to get seeded. So in theory, you're correct, but that was an oopsie during the patch that they didn't quite get seeded. So, but yes, I'm kind of making fun, but yes, you're right. For the first time, that what was the gas harvesters in the game were renamed scoops, and the new gas harvester is much more like a strip miner. And those ships are going to hoover gas up at a much more rapid pace than what was available before. And in the update thread, there are graphs showing. I think they show gas, or maybe someone made one that I saw, but it's going to be a substantial increase in the ability to I always say huff gas, but I think there's a more technical term for it that some of the wormholers use. I'm not really sure, but you should be able to extract that from the environment at a much higher pace.
Yeah, and it provides some interesting choices that you get to make. When we're looking at ship rebalances, I didn't see that the Venture, Endurance, or Prospect got touched. Did I miss those?
Well, the Venture got the gas bonus removed and then put back on. And again, once the compression comes in, um, I didn't mind too much without the compression coming in, because you're still the volume of the gas is just pretty big. But once we get the compression in and that kind of stuff, and the volume gets down, I think that's when you're really going to see a lot of that stuff shine. And that's when I'm going to push more for the gas side of it. Now, very little changed on the gas side during this patch, other than the addition of the modules for the barges. And but without the compression, it's kind of almost an unfinished process there, because it really needs the compression, because everything's coming out of wormholes, or all the Fullerites are coming out of wormholes anyway. The Mito and Saito is null sec and low sec and high sec, but still, that's kind of where that's going to shine, and that's where I'm going to push for more of the gas changes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dive into it too deep here because there is more coming later. But from my perspective as a ninja gas huffer, so to speak, my current setup, I've got 5 ventures and a gnosis. Looking forward, I'm considering swapping to coveters, because with the ore hole, like a single gas site with that many ships that I'm fielding, I'm not filling up an ore hole even in a venture, let alone a coveter. It's going to be similar. The coveter just nukes it that much faster. And when my goal is to get in and get out as quick as possible to reduce the risk of being caught, mining barges are a fantastic option because I just get out even faster, and I can use a coveter because I don't need that much ore hold. I don't have to worry about a Mackinac or a Procurer. If I'm caught, I'm dead anyway. So that's what I'm looking to be changing to. I'm sure there's, with this patch, all of these adjustments, there's lots of new meaningful choices to make, which I'm really happy about. It's no longer just this is your best ship, this is what you want to skill towards, it's going to be a long road to get there, save up your ISK. Now it's you're wanting to do this, here are the factors, here are the trade-offs you have to make the best choice for your own situation, which I think is great.
And I believe, didn't they added residue to that too?
Yes.
I'm not sure. Okay, yeah. So there is residue for the gas harvesters and stuff as well.
And this is one which is going to be interesting depending on the type of player that you are. I know a lot of people who harvest gas do it just for ISK per hour. Like it's well known as a great opportunity for new players to make some quick ISK, especially if you're looking to get into mining. Skillbook's a little bit expensive, but after that first haul, like jump into a C5, you're making a lot of money. With the waste, for those players, all you're looking for is ISK per hour. You don't care about how much gas you come home with unless it's a matter of maximizing your ISK per hour. So waste on gas huffing, I'm fine. I'm going to be using type T crystals all day, or type B, excuse me, because it's just maximizing that ISK per hour, minimizing that time I'm in space and at risk. So I'm loving it. It's going to be great.
I don't think there's crystals for gas harvesting.
Oh, you're right. I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
Man.
but the Tech 2 will have, I think that's what I'm looking for right now.
Tech 2 has a 34% residue probability and a 1x multiplier.
Okay, yeah, so there you go. So there will be some residue there, but there's no crystals.
And it looks like they have like a type C scoop. So the crop gas cloud scoop, interestingly enough, has a 100% residue probability and a 2x volume.
That's a turret. That's a turret.
Yeah, so like the different turrets are like your different crystals if you're looking gas versus ore, right? So we have a turret that does low waste, that's a T1. Then we have the T2, which does, you have some residue, but you're also mining faster. And then we have this crazy crop gas cloud scoop, which does just crazy amounts of residue.
Right. But what's the Tech 2 retrieved per amount? What's the amount on that?
Let me see if I can find it.
It doesn't have it, but most of them are around 20, somewhere around there. If you look at the Tech 2 version for the coveter that you were talking about, its mining amount is 200, so 10 times as much.
Oh, wow. So you really want to be using barges for this.
Yeah. Cha-ching. The bad part is optimal range, 1,500 meters. So you got to be up close and personal, but you were pretty much there already. But you will absolutely, factor of 10 be pulling in gas much, much quicker.
Yeah, and pro tip, if you're trying to harvest gas, if you like warp to a ping or warp an alt in first and bookmark it, you can then warp to the bookmark and you're just right in the center of that gas cloud. So you don't have to worry about it shrinking. You don't have to worry about slowly moving your ship in. You can just warp to the center, align out, be ready to warp out at a moment's notice and harvest that gas till it's gone. All right, so we've talked about a bunch of changes. We've talked about the introduction of residue mechanics. We've talked about a rework of the mining crystals. We didn't talk about the skills related to that. Let's jump into that real quick. You mentioned at the top of the show, some players may have noticed extra unallocated skill points in their character sheet. What is that for?
Okay, so this, because I had the most to do with this, I suggested this, and it worked out better than I could have imagined. So before there was 4, 9, 12, 15, there was 19 different crystals for mineral ore. You had mercoxit, the three Triglavian ones, and then 15 regular ores. So what they did is they made categories of them, just like with moons. Moons were really easy because they put the 4R4s together, the 4R8s, the 4, But so the way that they did it with these categories is more like there's the HiSec one, there's the null sec one, there's the low sec one, and then there's kind of the other one. But in order to do that, everything had to be refunded. You couldn't, all the old skill books were no longer any good, that kind of stuff. So what they did was they went through, they removed all your skill books and all your skills and put them back to unallocated. And when you go to retrain them up, let me get to that graph here. This is where it's most beneficial to the new players. So under the old system, if a new player in HiSec trained Veldspar, Scordite, Plagio, and Pyro, they would have trained 1 million skill points. That's about 3 weeks, roughly, 2.5 weeks of training, something like that. Under the new plan, and they couldn't train them all simultaneously. So they would train Veldspar. They could mine Veldspar for a couple days while it took them 3 or 4 more days to train up Scordite, a couple more days to train up Pyro. Now they train them all at the same time, and the total skill point value is 768,000. So they saved 25% in overall skill points. They make one train, and they can use the simple crystals, and they can mine Veldspar, Scordite, Plagio, and Pyro all with the same crystal. So you never get into the thing before we had Veldspar crystals in and you accidentally mined Scordite and then you didn't get the bonus. And why am I not getting the ore? And it's just very hard to get a grasp of all that when you first start mining. So now it's much more simplified. The other one is the coherent, which I think is mostly the low sec ores, head, hem, jaspit, amber, and kernite. They took the next brunt of the reduction. So all of those skills prior were 2.8 million. In order to train coherent, you'll be 1.5 million total. So you'll save almost a month of training just on that group of skills alone, 1.3 million skill points saved there. And then the variegated, which is the next one, you save like 200,000. And then all the high ends are all exactly the same. So if you add up Arcanor, Bisto, and Spod and everything that you train them up to, and you get the new skill book, it's the exact same amount to train those back. So all the savings is on the low end. It all benefits new players. They get into crystals quicker and with less complexity. And on the high end, once you get to the high end and you're mining Arcanor, Bisto, and Spod, yeah, you're paying the price just like all the rest of the vets because you're not a new bro really at that point anymore. So that's the way that worked out. And I've found one person who doesn't like this, and I really couldn't understand his reasoning, but God bless him. Other than that, I'm really proud of the way this turned out, and I hope it helps people for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, not to mention the impact on the reprocessing folks. So if you're a reprocessor and you had all these skills trained, put them back in, you'll still have some extra left over, which is awesome. All the good stuff for the new players in the mining. Plus, the thing I just can't get over with these new crystals, not only is it simpler and cheaper and faster, but once you do get into that crystal section, now you just have more meaningful choices to make. You get to choose, do I want to make ISK faster, or do I want to not waste any of the limited resources I have available? Or do I want to ruin someone else's day by destroying all of their ore? It's wonderful. All right. That is the skills, what happened with those. So some extra skill points if you had some of them trained previously. Are there any other changes we haven't discussed yet?
The only other thing is the changes to the industry. Um, the one big one is the water in the core temperature regulator. The water required got cut in half. So that doesn't sound like much, but if you were building an avatar and it took 6 freighters full of water to build an avatar, now it only takes 3 freighters worth of water. So if you look at it like that, it's massive. If you look at it from a faction ship standpoint, um, it will help faction prices quite a bit because it's a larger percentage of their cost, and not so much the raw ISK cost, but the cost of logistics. So, like if you're buying the water and having to move it and build the core temperature regulators, then the amount that you're moving is less, so your hauling fees are less, that kind of stuff. If you're buying it in JITA, I mean, I'm sure the price will go down, but it probably won't be necessarily a meaningful change in ISK. But if you look at the change as a whole, depending on where you are in the chain, it can be a pretty meaningful change to what you're doing. And then the rest of this stuff is mainly for capitals. They reduced a lot of the P4 PI. Um, Again, I look at it more as a logistics change. I don't think it's not gonna change the price of anything dramatically, but logistically moving the stuff around, it's a big help in that regard.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm looking further down at some of these other components, and do I remember right that these enhanced Neuralink protection cells, aren't these part of the stuff that was introduced in the new exploration sites a few patches ago? Am I
Uh, it
misremembering?
it might have been. That's actually a blueprint, and it's used to make supers and stuff. So I'm not
Okay,
sure
I'm
what
probably
they've
wrong.
put in there. I know that there's been a lot of talk and a lot of people want it and read it and whatever else. And honestly, I've kind of stayed out of that realm because it's just not what I do. But some of the inputs to that blueprint are what drop in those sites, I know for sure. Um, and so some of the inputs to that is what drop. I don't know that the actual final product is what's dropping.
That's awesome. Yeah, and with all these capital construction changes, it is a very complex system. Whether you're talking caps, super caps, faction ships, what have you. So if you're trying to wrap your head around how things have changed, we can fortunately tell you that RavWorks, a tool that many industrialists use, we've had the creator Ravendale on the show before. It has been updated with all of the changes. So if you want to go in and look at like a tree of okay, what's going into my super capital construction jobs now post patch, you can go and have a look. It has been updated with the new numbers. So if you're that kind of person, good news.
Yeah, Fuzzworks has been updated as well.
Oh, awesome. Sweet. Okay, so we've got changes to industry, we've got changes to skills, we've got changes to mining crystals we talked about, and all of the ship changes. Overall, piecing it all together, and this is just my opinion, I'm sure different people will have other opinions on the sum of the parts, but I think for new bros, it's a whole lot better. It's quicker for them to get into higher end stuff. They don't have to worry about any residue and being prevented from participating in content. They also just things are getting better for them. Higher end players, if you have higher skills, you're making ISK even faster than you were before, with the choice of whether you want residue or not. And then quality of life improvements for capital construction, super capital construction. Is that like a good synopsis?
Right. Yeah. Especially for the higher end players, even if you choose the Type A crystals, you're still making ISK faster than you were before. And then the Type B, you can just make it just 25% faster on top of that. It's using a barge.
Yeah. And for the Rorqual and Orca pilots out there, do the math, make a decision on whether it's better going to a barge instead of sticking with your Orca or Rorqual. I'd imagine like large scale alliances or industrial corporations who have organized mining ops, they might be changing their ways. Instead of just, okay, everybody bring your Rorqual, maybe you make a decision on this is how many Rorquals we need, everybody else in hulks, because you're mining faster now.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote that post on our forums for PL this afternoon.
Oh yeah, you wanna leak it to us? What are you guys doing?
Not really. It's nothing fancy. Tech One and Ore for R64s, A types for R32s and 16s, and then R4 and R8 is free for all. You can mine it in a Rorqual, B types, whatever, and then of course all the anomalies and stuff. I don't really care.
Fair enough. All right, well, that is a quick rundown of the patch notes for today. Lots of changes. We're going to continue to discuss what impact these changes may have going forward, as well as what impact the development of these changes had, because it's just quite the party getting to where we are today. I do want to quickly talk about the known issues. We mentioned a few of the highlights earlier in the show, but just bear in mind, this is a development process. This is a huge amount of changes, so there are bound to be bugs. Some of the key ones have already been identified. So if you see something, you're like, hang on, that doesn't make sense, double check, see if it's here. If it's not, bug report it so that it can get here. And then CCP will work quickly and diligently to get those resolved.
Yeah, a couple of the big ones, Mercoxit. The Mercoxit skill was refunded and the new skill put in, but you currently can't train it. It's known. I don't know when it's going to be fixed, but the other kind of big one, we talked about the industrial reconfiguration part as far as the reduction in heavy water. So that one's still out there. And the other one, the Mercoxit Type A crystal blueprint is not available on the market yet. I'm not sure. I assume it's still in the game because it got ported over. Just probably the market category or market whatever, because it's I think it's a new type ID is the technical nerd term for it. I'm not really sure. You don't want me working on your code either. But the mining hold for the miasmos is not gaining capacity from the Galenti industrial skill either. Oh. So few little things to work on there. But I'm sure the team will be working on this quickly if they haven't already got some of these down. And the other thing, if you're in a mining ship using something that has waste, and you mouse over and the little tooltip that pops up, it is wrong. If you're using Tech One strips or ore, it's probably right, but I'm not going to tell you it is. I'm just going to say that all the mouse over tooltips are suspect, but I think it has something to do with the way the wastage is calculated. It's kind of adding some of that in because they're all too high. To give you an idea, my Hulk was saying it was 4,705 cubic meters per laser. In actuality, it was 2,608 is what I got. I think that 2,613 is the real number, but I was mining ARC, so I just got 2,608 because that's how the numbers work out for that volume. CCP round got me there for 5 cubic meters. But they're not indicating correctly. So I've heard a lot of, oh, my yield's this, my yield's that. Oh yeah, because my tooltip said this. Well, your tooltip isn't actually correct yet. So that's, just be careful. As we said in the beginning, the attributes tab is up to date. So you can use your attributes tab to find out what your actual mining yield is.
Yeah, and it occurs to me when we went through those changes, we forgot to mention some updates to the different haulers. Specifically, what is it? The Cryos and the Hoarder were updated to have new ore holds or new specific holds for kinds of harvestable materials. It is getting more and more difficult to talk about this in an accurate way. So specifically the Cryos, you've got a new mineral hold and a new ice hold. And for the hoarder, you've got a gas hold. So we have a dedicated T1 gas hauler now, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's the other thing I'm looking forward to, compression. I really, and it's the same thing over here in Europe, except for most of them are orange. But the typical little propane can that you have, for your gas grill or something from Blue Rhino. Now you can't use Blue Rhino because that's a trademark name. But I would love to have the icon for compressed gas be the little 20-pound, propane tank thing. I don't know if they made stupid Americano go away, but I think that would be pretty cool for that to be the icon for it in game.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right, well, that's the rundown of the patch from today. Lots of changes, lots of improvements in my mind. We'd love to hear your thoughts about it. We've had plenty of folks chatting about it, and people talk just about anywhere they have the ability to. So I'm sure you can strike up a discussion with someone if you'd like to. Some other things just worth noting in terms of CCP news, there's a new starter pack that's been released called the Platinum Starter Pack. Got some stuff in it if that's your jam. Oh, those are some fancy skins I've never seen before, and I guess they're also new. That's cool. So there's also new ship skins and apparel as well that I didn't even realize, but good job, CCP, for including those together. All right, let's talk a little bit about player news now. We've talked a lot about the game news. Let's talk about the players. Just a quick rundown because we are running long on time today. If we're looking at the overall map, we've been tracking a couple of developing stories over time. The war in the southeast, the war up in the northwest, and there's now a second one in Cloud Ring. Pureblind remained mostly the same, not much activity there. I think that is fairly settled for the time being until something changes. Cloud Ring, an ongoing conflict between Triumvirate and members of the Imperium, specifically Ranger Regiment and FXR, or Imperium-aligned entities, excuse me. So that's still ongoing. Tri are still holding some space. So that is an actively contested war zone to keep an eye at. And then if we're looking further down south, interesting changes have been happening. Previously, the conflict was taking place in Amensi Tenerifis, then just Tenerifis. Now it's moving into Faithabalis and Scalding Pass. So we've got sort of a two-front conflict happening here where Fire Coalition are making offensive sovereignty actions in Faithabalis, and PIBC and Wrecking Crew are doing offensive actions in Scalding Pass. So that's an interesting development to keep your eye on. Looking at corporation and alliance moves, we had a really cool one. Specifically, in Test Alliance, please ignore. It is a very storied corporation. I don't know their full history. I just know the name. And it is HIRR, HIRR, recently left Test. They haven't gone anywhere else yet, so we don't know what's going to happen to them. But you may recognize the name, and I'm sure we'll have one of our resident historians, so to speak, discuss more about the significance of them and what they do later. So keep an eye on that. Other corporation and alliance news. We had another alliance bite the dust, so to speak. VVV, Veni Vidi Vici, has lost a number of corporations and members, most of them moving over to Pandemic Horde. So VVV are PanFam aligned, and this seems to be just more consolidation that we've actually seen happen elsewhere as well. We saw it a little bit down in PIBC. We saw it a little bit in Fire Coalition, I think. No, I'm wrong. But this is an interesting trend to keep an eye on. Oh, and PanFam as well. It was NC Dot gained some corporations from another group that we talked about last week. So a trend to keep an eye on, consolidation of groups into larger powers.
Yeah, hers an old Morsus Mihi Corp. I don't remember if that was Vuk Laos Corp or not, but yeah, that was old Morsus Mihi.
Recon joined NC. Thank you for the correction. And Morsus Mihi, I can't place that name. What did they do?
I think 2006, 7, 8 time frame. They lived in Tribute. A lot of old players, a lot of animosity towards Bob, I think. Man, that was a long time ago. But yeah, it's just an alliance, and They got smacked around, and they fought with AAA a lot, and Bob and all that stuff. So, yep.
Yeah, Matterall confirms it wasn't Vuk'Lau's Corp, but they were old Northern Coalition. They led the old Northern Coalition before, like, same
Yeah,
name, Northern
not
Coalition,
NC.
different thing.
Yeah. NC Dot was instrumental in basically dismantling NC.
Man, Eve is a great game, but we really need to do better on our naming conventions, because this is. I feel really bad for Andrew Goen having to tell the history of EVE Online with all these conflicting names. All right, well, that'll do it for the news that we have to cover today on today's episode of Talking Stations. Thank you very much, Kenneth Feld, esteemed CSM member and industrialist heavyweight, for joining me on the show today, as well as all our folks, our engineer, for joining us and doing that as well, plus all of the TIS staff and crew who help put these shows together in the behind the scenes. You'll see a bunch of names scrolling in their credits. Speaking of those names, we're going to have Shen, Nick, and some other folks on tomorrow, I think Malaclips as well, if that's confirmed, to talk about the market impacts from these changes. Whenever a patch hits, you can be guaranteed it's going to impact the markets. They're going to go through how and why. Specifically a focus on like the industry changes, influx of resources on a macro level. And then later on into the week, of course, we're going to keep you up to date on the developing war news, on any additional changes that we see coming through with the industry side and all of that fun stuff. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for joining me. See you in space.